Hello, my name is Nalani Brown. I'm the philanthropy coordinator at Frank Toby Jones, and I'm here to pick up on Rita Mae Brown's and Sneaky Pie Brown's Cat on the Scent. We left off on chapter 3, which is where I will begin. Blair glided down Route 250 toward Greenwood at 60 miles an hour. He was only in second gear, and the trachometer wasn't even close to the red zone. Harry couldn't believe the surge of power or the handling. They hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.4 seconds. The balance of the car astounded her. The Old Farm Mischief blurred by. Then Mirador, Misfit's big sister. Then Blair downshifted, turned right, and headed back toward the Greenwood School. The road snaking and the car sweeping around each sharp curve without a shudder, a roll, or a skid. "Don't you love it?" Blair laughed out loud. She sighed. Deep love. A short stretch of flat land beckoned. He smoothly shifted the speedometer. The speedometer glided past 100. Then Blair expertly downshifted as a curve rolled off to the right. Unfortunately, Sheriff Rick Shaw was rolling too, right out of Sir H. Vane Tempest's driveway. He hit the siren and snapped on the whirling lights. "Damn," Blair whispered. "What's he doing out here in the boonies? He ought to be on Route 29. Harry glanced in the rear view mirror. Is it Rick or Cynthia? Blair squinted at the distant object, which was fast approaching. Rick. Cynthia doesn't wear her hat in the squad car. That makes sense. Turn your head and the brim hits the window. Rick's balding, remember? There is that. Blair half smiled as she pulled over. The Porsche stopped as smooth as silk. He lowered the window and reached in the side pocket of the door for the relevant papers as Rick lumbered up. As I live and breathe, Blair Bainbridge. Rick bent over. And our esteemed postmistress. License, please, he sang out. Oh, Blair fished around in his hip pocket, pulled out his crocodile wallet, and handed the license to Rick. Blair, do you have any idea how fast you were going? Yes, I do. Uh-huh. You know, of course, that the speed limit in the state of Virginia is 55 miles per hour. No, I don't think that's the smartest law in the books, but I have to enforce it. Yes, sir. When did you get this vehicle? This morning. Uh-huh. Why don't you get out of the car a minute? In a show of sympathy, Harry unfastened her seatbelt and got out too. Let me see that engine. Rick popped up the back, revealing a giant turbo covering the engine. That's a pain in the ass, the sheriff grumbled. It's the turbo, Chief. It forces air back in here. Blair pointed to the inlet side, which boosts the horsepower to 400. Here's the delivery side. 400 horsepower? Rick whispered reverently. Blair smiled, knowing the sheriff was hooked. The intake or flow is split toward the left and right exhaust turbochargers. The air gets reunited, flows past the throttle, and goes into the cylinder heads in virtually direct sequence. He paused, realizing he was getting too technical. The pollution level falls below government requirements, which is a good thing. Drive a turbo and be environmentally responsible. Uh-huh. Rick ran his hand over the rear fender, which slightly resembled a horse's hindquarters, then ducked his head inside the driver's side. Not much room in the back. Big enough for Mrs. Murphy, Tucker, and Pewter. Harry finally said something. I'm surprised they aren't with you. Rick pushed his hat back on his head. Now, in order to be fair here, I need to know a little more about this car. Can we all fit in it? Sure, Blair said. Tell you what, guys. I'll stay with the squad car. You two roll on, Harry said. Rick furtively looked around. Well, no one will know a thing. If anyone stops, I'll say you're investigating a rustling call and I came along for the ride. You're out in the pasture. Well, all right, Rick agreed. If H. Vane Tempest happens to come by, don't say a word. Got his nose out of joint again? Harry casually asked. Rick grunted. He's a little different. Different, Harry giggled. He's got more money than God, and he acts like he is God. He and Archie Ingram pester me with more calls than anyone else in the county. and this is a county full of nutcases. Archie Ingram, one of the county commissioners, a handsome man, courtly to woman, was so violently opposed to most development schemes that he had attached radical detractors and equally radical supporters. H. Vane is a big nose in the environmental group. I guess he and Archie have to work closely together. Ideas are one thing, temperament's another. Rick hooked his thumb in his gun belt. I predict those who can't stay on the same term for long. Sheriff, would you like to drive? Blair asked. Well, go on. Rick slipped behind the wheel. Blair winked at Harry, then folded his 6'4" frame into the passenger side. That button will push the seat down, back or forward. There you go, and you can raise the lower seat too. Isn't that something? Rick's seduction would be complete once he touched the accelerator. He reached to the right for the key. On the left. That's weird. A leftover from the great racing days when drivers had to sprint to their cars. If the ignition was on the left, it gave them a split-second advantage. The driver could start the car and shift into gear simultaneously. Well, I'll be damned. Rick turned the key. The pistons awakened like sleeping beauty. Rick stalled out. Takes a while to get used to the clutch. Everything is much more sensitive than you or I are accustomed to. It's not so much about technology, it's about feel. Yeah. Rick engaged the clutch and touched the gas, then shot down the road. Harry folded her arms across her chest, watching the car lurch into second. It would take Rick a few more tries. She walked back to the squad car, sat down, and clicked on the two-way radio. Milden Hall, the estate of Sir H. Vane Tempest, was immediately behind her. The over-large sign, emblazoned with a gold griffin on a blood-red field, swung slightly in the breeze. Harry turned off the radio, swung her legs out, and closed the door. The day was too pleasant for sitting in the car. She walked back toward the sign. A car cruised around the corner, having turned off 250. Harry waved and Susan Tucker pulled her Audi to the left side of the road. What are you doing here? Harry walked over to his best friend. Joyriding. Blair bought a Porsche Turbo, and as luck would have it, Rickshaw came out of H. Vane's driveway just as we slowed down to 80-something. Where's Blair now? In jail? No, he's letting Drip drive the Turbo. Susan laughed. That's a good one. What are you doing out here? On my way to drop off books for Chris Middleton. I want to persuade him to give a walk at the high school for career day. Chris was a small animals veterinarian, one of the best. Good idea. And then I have to meet Mim, her royal pain in the ass, at the club. She's fussed up about this board meeting over the water supply. The county's been fighting about the reservoir so long, I don't know why she still lets it get to her. We've got to do something with the development in the northwest corner of the county. They need water. Exactly, but the reservoir plan is already outdated and it hasn't been built yet. Susan pouted for a minute. Archie Ingram, as usual, wants to turn the clock back to 1890. Make it 1840, then he could own slaves. Harry approved of conversation, but Archie Ingram took it too far. Good one, Harry, Susan smiled. Oh, that reminds me, the battle reenactment at Oak Ridge. You have to be there. No, I don't. Yes, you do, because Ned needs camp followers. Ned was Susan's husband, a lawyer by trade and a reenactor in Civil War battles on weekends. The latter was becoming a passion. Susan, I hate that war stuff. Living history. I'll think about it. Harry, Susan lowered her voice. Susan, you do it. Takes two women to keep your husband happy these days. That's right, girlfriend. That's right, girlfriend, and I even have your costume. Susan, you're both nuts. I'll look fetching in a bonnet. I'm not wearing period clothes. Period. Harry heard the distant, distinctive sound of the Porsche. Push on, because Rick will be embarrassed if he gets back and finds you here. We don't want Blair to get a ticket. Tell Blair that Ned expects him in the 1st Virginia. That was the name of Ned's unit. The reenactors were fanatical about detail, down to the last button. "I will." Harry kissed her on the cheek. Susan kissed air in return, then drove away. By the time the Porsche drove into view, Harry was back leaning against the car. A beaming rickshaw stayed behind the wheel. "You deserve a car like that, Sheriff." "I never drove anything like that in my life," Rick said, his voice full of wonder. He wouldn't get out of the car. He was like a child at Christmas, sitting under the tree, fondling his favorite present. "I just had to have it," Blair smiled. "Boys with toys," as Harry would say. "Hate to leave this baby." Rick finally slid out from under the wheel. He walked alongside the front of the car, running his top finger over the curving, graceful lines. "Kind of like an egg on its side." "Yes." Rick opened the creaking door of the squad car. "Blair, stay inside the speed limit." "Yes, sir." "Harry," mum's the word. "Okay." She smiled at Rick, whom she liked even though he chided her about being an amateur detective. His word was busybody. He clicked on the radio. "Car 1, car 1. "Car 1, Rick answered. "Where have you been, boss?" Deputy Cynthia Cooper's voice crackled. "Sir, H. Vane Tempest. His wife says Archie Ingram threatened her husband with bodily harm. H. poo-poos it. Said they simply had a disagreement over sensitive environmental issues." "Ooh la," Coop sang out. "See you in 10, over and out." Rick started the motor and Harry backed away from his window. Rick winked at her, then pulled out, made a U-turn, and cruised back to 250. Blair folded his arms across his muscled chest. "Man fell in love before my very eyes. Doesn't everyone?" Harry enjoyed her double entendre, for Blair was stunning to the point of leaving women breathless, and a few men too, for that matter. "How about you, then?" He held open the driver's side door, ushering her into the cockpit. Harry sat still, inhaling the rich leather smell as she reached for the key on her left. Blair closed the passenger door behind him. "Ready, Eddie?" She turned over the key. "Shoot the goose, Bruce." "I never heard that." "Maybe it's shoot the juice." Blair laughed. She did, and they roared into Greenwood, around the little town and back to the Crozet by every back mountain road she could remember. When they finally pulled into the driveway, T. Tucker burst through the animal door of the house, then pushed open the screen door, happy to see her mother. Mrs. Murphy turned to Pewter, both of them reposing on the kitchen table, forbidden to them and therefore more appealing. "That dog will never learn." Pewter tapped her skull with one extended claw. "Dog brains." Mrs. Murphy jumped over to the window over the kitchen sink. "They're coming inside, off the table." Pewter waited until she heard the screen door slam before leaving the table. "Hi, kids," Harry greeted her cats, who ignored her. "Make her suffer for leaving us here." Mrs. Murphy stalked into the living room. Pewter, knowing some manner of food would be placed on the table, decided to be mildly friendly. Harry spied on the cat hair on the table and wiped it off with a wet dish rag. "You were on the table." "Was not," Mrs. Murphy called from the living room. "Was too," Tucker tattled. "Shut up, you little brown nose," Mrs. Murphy yelled at the dog. "Blair, thank you again for letting me drive a dream." She opened the refrigerator door, removing cornbread and butter. Not that she had made cornbread. Miranda had given her a big pan of it Friday after they left work. "Anytime." "Oh, I forgot to tell you. Susan drove by while I was waiting for you and the sheriff. She said Ned expects you in the 1st Virginia for reenactment at Oak Ridge." "I'll call him." "I didn't know you were into that battle stuff." "I'm not. They're short of bodies." "Isn't it expensive to get the gear?" "Yeah, but I can't complain if I've just bought a turbo, can I?" He laughed. "Some of these guys are a little extreme, but I'm looking forward to it." "Extreme?" Mrs. Murphy sardonically replied as she walked back to the kitchen, pointedly not paying attention to Harry. "They're a quart low." "I think it's fascinating." Tucker sat down on Blair's foot. "You think anything's fascinating that has dead bodies in it." "Well, dogs eat carrion." That's what they're for, I guess. Pewter pressed against the refrigerator door. Nature's garbage collectors. People hang out deer for a few days, Tucker rejoined. Better gut them the minute you kill them or you'll have some terrible tasting deer. Mrs. Murphy wasn't fond of venison, but she could eat it if prepared in buttermilk. Pewter moved back to the table. Pewter moved back to the table. There aren't going to be any dead bodies at the reenactment, just people pretending to be dead. The way things have been going, the commission meeting coming up might have a few dead bodies, Tucker giggled. Pewter turned her full attention on Harry, who had set out some thinly sliced roast beef. Stay on the floor, Harry reminded her. Harry read her mind, not difficult under the circumstances. One teensy piece, Pewter begged. Me too. Tucker had been transformed into Miss Adorable. No, Harry said, but without too much oomph. She'll weaken if you sit by the chair. Pewter hurried to get on Harry's right side. You say that every time. The tiger cat laughed, but he hurried to Blair's side, figuring he'd weaken before Harry. I had no idea that Sir H. Vane Tempest pestered Sheriff Shaw so often. Tempest is a teapot, is what Miranda calls him. Harry stuck her knife into a pot of creamy homemade mustard. But Archie's picking fights with everyone. Even though he and H. Vane seem to be in a phase of political agreement, he's even fighting Mim. Not a smart move. Getting on the wrong side of Dr. H isn't smart either. His net worth is more than the gross national product of Chile. Mrs. Murphy, what do you know about H. Vane? Tucker never took her eyes off of Harry's hands. He doesn't have cats or dogs, which bespeaks an empty life. Blair dropped her a sliver of roast beef, which she daintily ate. Are you going to the commission meeting? Harry asked her guest. You bet. It's going to be the best show this spring. Okay, now we're back on to chapter 4. Archie Ingram, a handsome man in his early 40s, smiled at the assemblage. The only hint that he was nervous was the tension in his cheek muscles. The classroom at Crozet High School spilled over with people, many standing in the hall. A topographical map of the county was on a bulletin board and behind the front table. I told you we should have used the auditorium, Archie complained to Jim Sanborn, the mayor of Crozet, as well as Mim's husband. As mayor, he chaired the county meeting in his town. Archie, these meetings usually number 3 people, each of whom wants a zoning variance for a trailer, a business, or a nursing home. The only reason all these people are here is that you've stirred up the hornet's nest. Bullshit, he growled at the large, genial man. Jim ignored him, waving a greeting to the Reverend Herbert Jones. Jim, I brought my dowser. Herb held the wooden divining rod, which worked well despite naysayers. Spare me, Archie muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the room, resting a second on the beautiful Sarah Vane Tempest before darting away. What? Jim asked. Where's Tommy Van Allen? Archie demanded. I'm not delaying this meeting one more time for him. I don't know. I called and he wasn't at work. Typical. Archie tapped his pencil on the tabletop. The only reason he ever wanted this thankless job was to find out when and where we'd be making road improvements and granting commercial zoning permits. Gives him more time to put together a good bid. Come on, Arch, you don't believe that. The hell I don't. Archie snapped his mouth shut like a turtle. Harry, Mrs. Murphy, Tucker, and Pewter sat in the middle next to Harry's colleague in the post office. Miranda Hagendauber. Also there was Susan and Ned Tucker, Harry's ex-husband, Fair Hairstein, and Boom Boom Craycroft. The widow Craycroft was not Harry's favorite person. Blair accompanied Mim's daughter, Marilyn. Little Mim, as she was known, stood up in front of her mother, who was already poring over the large map of the county. Sir Henry Vane Tempest, called H, or H. Vane by everyone, sat off to the side, his horn-rimmed spectacles sliding down his long nose. He had taken the precaution of bugging each county commissioner's office. Once a week, the transcript was discreetly brought to him as his farm by Turek Sade, head of Sade and Trumbo investigations. Vane Tempest made certain that his wife knew nothing of this. No one and H would keep it that way. No one knew, and H would keep it that way. Next to him was Ridley Kent, a rich ne'er-do-well whose primary occupation was staring at women's bodices. He happened to be sitting beside a good one. Sarah Van Tempest was H. Vane's trophy wife, an elegant blonde whose cool beauty owed little to the extensive clothes she wore. "The gang's all here," Susan said to Harry. "Frightening, isn't it?" Harry sarcastically replied. "Holding negative feelings will eat you up and destroy your good health," Boom Boom crooned. "Shut up, Boom. That's exactly what I'm talking about." Boom Boom cast her violet eyes at Harry. Archie noticed Mrs. Murphy sauntering up to the map. "Get the cat out of here." "I beg your pardon." Mrs. Murphy stared at him. "Mary Minor Hairstein, those animals have no place in here." Archie pointed to Pewter on her lap and Tucker seated at Fair's cowboy booted feet. "Hey, Murphy, jump on the table and blow a tuna fart right in his face," Pewter called out. "How rude!" Mrs. Murphy giggled, but she did jump on the desk to stare Archie directly in the eye. "Murphy," Harry called to her. "You are a sorry excuse for a mammal," Mrs. Murphy insulted Archie, who blinked as she spoke. "She's saying that she's a resident of Albemarle County, too, and the water supply affects her." Mim's upper-class voice hushed the room. "That's right, honey bun," Jim, not upper class, said. Everyone laughed. "Then at least keep this feline with you," Archie told Harry. Mrs. Murphy, the full attention of the room on her, flopped on her side, cocking her head at the audience. "Isn't she adorable? She knows we're talking about her," one of the old ladies said. "Oh, gag me," Pewter sniped. "Mrs. Murphy, come back here," Harry said firmly. She was put out at Mrs. Murphy showing off, but secretly she was also enjoying Archie Ingram's discomfort. She could be so pompous. Naturally, Mrs. Murphy flopped on the other side, again gazing at her fans. She emitted a honey-coated meow. "Precious," another voice cooed. Even Tucker took queasy. Harry handed Pewter to Fair, stood up, and stepped along a row of desks to the other aisle. "Madam, you get off that desk. 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to go." The tiger cat sang out, sat up, grabbed Archie's pencil in her teeth, and leapt off the front table. "Hey!" Archie boomed as everyone in the classroom laughed at him. "Hey, I want that back!" Mrs. Murphy pranced over to Sarah Vane Tempest, dropping the pencil at her expensively shod feet. "I can't believe you did that," Pewter hollered at her. "Watch me." She skidded out of the hallway, dodging legs, and finally sat down under the water fountain. By the time Harry caught up with her, she was intently grooming the tip of her tail. "Monster!" "Broccoli eater." "If you even move your eyebrows, I'm taking you to the truck." "Take me to Blair's Porsche. I don't want to sit in the truck." "Don't you mouth off at me," Harry warned her. "Who else am I going to mouth off to?" Harry paused, wondering whether to take her back into the meeting or go directly to the truck. Well aware of Murphy's lethal temper, she thought the cat would be safer in sight than out of sight. She scooped up the silky-coated creature, holding her bottom while Murphy leaned on her shoulder, winking at passerbys. By the time Harry reached the classroom, her seat had been taken. Pewter stood up on Fair's lap, paws on his shoulders, looking for her buddy. Upon seeing Mrs. Murphy, she jumped down and walked to the back of the room. Meanwhile, Archie was explaining to the assembled why the reservoir plan was outdated. He couldn't resist reminding them that he had always been an opponent of unchecked growth. However, the population had grown, the water supply had not, and as a public servant, he had to find a solution. Before he could finish his presentation, the county commissioner next to him dropped his tablet. It hit the floor with a loud clatter. Archie glared as Donald Jackson bent over to pick it up, tipped off balance, and fell over in a chair. Jim Sanborn quickly hopped out of his seat to assist Don, which made Archie look like a jerk since he was standing above a fallen man. Irritated, Archie continued reading off his figures. Archie, we all know that, Don tried to divert him. Everyone in this room knows the cost of building a new reservoir. He slapped his hand on the table, papers in his other hand shaking. Yes, it's on the handout sheet. You don't need to read that. In case anyone missed a handout sheet, a new reservoir in the northwest quadrant will cost us $32 million. What's wrong with rehabilitating Sugar Hollow? A voice from the middle piped up. Sugar Hollow is the site of an old reservoir. After what Hurricane Fran did, Archie imperiously dismissed the question. Not so fast, Archie, Ned Tucker spoke up. Given the importance of the issue, a feasibility study on reviving Sugar Hollow isn't a frivolous suggestion. Maybe we need them both, Sir H. Vane Tempest suggested with his soothing voice. And where would the money come from? Little Mim asked a sensible question yet received a frown from her mother. Big Mim preferred to speak before her offspring did, at which time she expected Little Mim to rubber stamp whatever she had. Aunt Tally, leaning on her silver-handled cane, cast a sharp eye at her family. The handle itself was carved in the shape of a hound's head. It had become Tally's signature accessory. From my pocketbook, Miranda good-naturedly called out. A few people laughed, others nodded. The county's population is tipped over 112,000. Jim, deep voice rumbling, folded his hands. The original plan for the reservoir between Free Union and Earlysville was drawn up in 1962, when the population is half of what it is today, and projections were not even close to our current rate of growth. That's the problem. That's the problem. Unrestrained growth. Archie again said, "We can't throw people out." Jim sighed, tactically acknowledging the problem. "No, but we can certainly put the lid on development." "You've done a good job for all of that by yourself," Sir H. Vane Tempest jokingly interjected. With little support from my colleagues, Archie's eyebrows twitched upward as he stared at the Englishman. "You've been opposed to growth, H. Vane, and I appreciate your vision. Unplanned growth. A master plan for this county would go a long way to solving these woes." Sir H. Vane Tempest appeared to shift politically ever so slightly. "We don't have a master plan." Archie's eyes narrowed. What was Vane Tempest up to? "This reservoir plan is not worth the paper it's printed on." Don Jackson shook his head. "Earlier commissions did not foresee this population boom nor the encroachment of Richmond and even Washington, on weekends anyways. Our infrastructure is woefully inadequate, and that includes our water supply." "Wouldn't it make sense to identify all of our water resources?" Fair Hairston stood up. "We have the runoff from the Blue Ridge Mountains, which I believe figured into the original reservoir plan. We have the remains of the reservoir at Sugar Hollow. We have the Rivanna, Meckham, and James rivers, which may yet prove useful." "He's right," Boom Boom smiled, which made Mem smile back. "Yuck," Harry whispered to Mrs. Murphy and Pewter. "And if we try to dam up the rivers, do we know what the state will do to us?" "Ha!" Archie threw up his hands. "To say nothing of the catastrophic environmental change? We can't be the only county trying to absorb new people." Sir H. Vane Tempest now stood up. In his early 70s, exuding vitality, he was well turned out. Although the ascot seemed pretentious for the occasion. The concept of a major reservoir preserving ourselves and even lower counties, such as Buckingham, isn't a frivolous idea. "Well, what about the water table?" Dr. Larry Johnson joined in. "Whatever we do, we have to examine the underground effect. This isn't about a building reservoir. Archie sat down, folding his arms across his chest. Dawn leaned forward. Precisely the reason for those local meetings. Our commission has to present your ideas to the state. There's no way Albemarle County can fund a reservoir. Even if we double taxes, we can't pay for it. So we have to go to Richmond no matter what, Jim Sanborn half informed the audience. Too much government. Richmond will only make it worse. Look at the bypass. Aunt Tally referred to a bottled up traffic mess that the state couldn't resolve, each plan being worse than the former. People nodded their heads in agreement. There's got to be enough water underground. Got to be. Ridley Kent shook his head. Ridley, if you had a brain, you'd be dangerous. Vane Tempest scoffed at his own joke. Ridley, not one to take offense, laughed back. I mean it. They're underground rivers as well as overground rivers. Exactly. Identify the water sources. Fair spoke again. I agree, but aren't these feasibility studies also expensive? Blair finally spoke. As a relative newcomer to Crozet, he had learned to wait his turn. Of course, you couldn't wait your turn until you knew your place on the totem pole, which he was finally figuring out. Given his income and his stunning good looks, he hovered in the middle, much higher than he had been shorn of his attributes. Not being Southern, there were moments when the elaborate, unspoken rules overwhelmed him. Harry usually translated for him. Hideously expressive, Archie leaned forward again. We know there's plenty of water. Plenty. Herb Jones's gravelly voice filled the room. But no matter how much we have, no matter where it is, we can't dam it up or pull it up without goring somebody's scared cow. I resent that. Archie jumped up. Sit down, Arch, Jim calmly commanded. Archie didn't listen. You're implying that because my farm is in the path of the reservoir, I stand to gain. I think I stand to lose. Oh, hell, Archie. I implied nothing, but you proved my point. The room erupted in laughter, then quieted as the elderly minister, beloved of all, continued. There's no way a project like this can go forward without enriching some and harming others. Once the state comes in and appraises your land or exercises eminent domain and claims land for their so-called greater good, whatever they do is going to be a real shell game. You got that right, Susan's husband Ned chimed in. And what about the bids for other jobs? Who would build the reservoir? You don't think that's political? Vane Tempest stood up again. Well, H. Vane, I'm not in the construction business. Archie glared at his former colleague, since he mistakenly assumed the criticism was directed at him. No, but Tommy Van Allen is. Vane Tempest appeared triumphant. He is hardly my best friend. Archie cleared his throat. What are you implying? Gentlemen, Van Allen's books are open. I have known him all my life. Jim Sanborn wanted to get this meeting over with. Means you've known Archie all his life, too. You have my sympathy. Vane Tempest catcalled, tired of Archie's oversensitivity. A few people laughed. Sarah elbowed her husband to stop. You know, if I weren't an elected official, I'd smash your face in. Archie clenched his fists, surprising people. He had a temper, but he was taking offense where only leaving humor was intended. That's quite enough. Mim rose, facing the gathering. We need more information. If we ask the state for another study, it will be at their convenience and at our expense. We're perfectly capable of identifying water sources ourselves. Once we've done that, we can formulate our own plan and then present that plan to the state, a preemptive strike, if you will. Archie and Donald, you take the Keswick-Sismont area. Hope I said that right. Wait a minute. We have to vote on this. Archie's face changed from red to pale white. Called the question, Miranda said. There's no motion on the floor, Jim said. I move that the county commissioners identify all possible water sources in the Albemarle County before our next meeting. Boom, boom, succulently. Okay. Boom Boom succinctly put forth the motion. I second the motion, Van Tempest said. Called the question, Miranda repeated. All those in favor, say aye. Jim cast his gaze over the room. Aye, came from the resounding reply. Opposed? Me, Archie said. I've got enough work to do. If you want to be reelected to the county commission, you'd better change your attitude, Mim warned. Coming from her, it was no idle threat. As the meeting broke up, Boom Boom pushed her way to the back. Harry, don't forget you're going to Lifeline with me Thursday night. I know. Harry showed no enthusiasm. 8 at the church. 8. Ha ha, Mrs. Murphy giggled. Boom Boom's got her. She promised. Poor Mom, she got caught on that one. Tucker thought it was funny too, for Lifeline was a group that looked inward, a spiritual awakening larded with lots of psychobabble. Harry was going to hate every minute, but she'd been hornswoggled into it. Harry was going to hate every minute, but she'd been hornswoggled into it in front of her friends last fall, and now that a new cycle of Lifeline was starting, she had to make good on her promise. Miranda bustled out, surrounded by her church friends. They sang in the choir at the Church of Holy Light. See you tomorrow, Harry. Bright and early, Harry smiled. Fair caught up to her and leaned down. Do you think someone has paid Archie off to be so obstructionist? Obstructionist, yeah. Do you think Archie has paid someone off to be so obstructionist? It doesn't make sense. He's so touchy. He's opposed to anything that will allow more people to move into the area. A reservoir would do that. At least I think that's what's going on. He's saying one thing but doing another. Fair smiled at his ex-wife's shrewd observation, but wondered what happened to Archie Ingram. Never the most likable man, but always a principled one. Boom Boom, her back to Harry, was talking to Blair about his Porsche. Sir H. Van Tempest and Sarah hurried by, glancing over their shoulders. Archie was in slow pursuit. They escaped out the front door as Ridley Kent bagged Archie, demanding to know when the next meeting would be. I don't know. Archie shoved him aside. Don Jackson, together with Jim Sanborn, caught up with Archie. Jesus, Arch, what's the matter with you? Nothing. These studies will take forever. I'll be an old man before we come to any conclusion, and the state will do whatever they want, which would be the rape of Albemarle County, her natural resources, her extraordinary beauty, and her historical value. Can't be that bad, Jim frowned, worried for Arch, who had a promising political future if he could learn to control his temper. It will take forever. Christ, some of us will be pushing up daisies. Then he stormed out the door. He's scared, said Mrs. Murphy. They could smell the fear, too. Ooh. I wonder what he is afraid of. We are on to chapter 5. Harry shot mail into the brass mailboxes as Miss Murphy sat on the ledge underneath the top section of boxes. The bottom section contained big boxes, big enough for Murphy to sit in. Harry hummed to herself as Miranda played the computer at the right side of the open counter. As much as Miranda hated computers, the tiny post office had finally received one, and Miranda had applied herself to the instructions that came with it. Being a bright woman, she had figured the machine out, but she didn't like it. The green letters on the screen, a touch fuzzy, hurt her eyes. Also, every time the power fritzed out, which happened often in the county, down went the computer. She could figure much faster with her trusty scale. No matter what the computer said, she still double-checked with the scale. Both women, early risers, came down at 7. Usually, by the time residents opened the front door to the post office, much of the mail was sorted, except during holidays. In the late spring, a few love letters filtered in. The few postcards from those taking early vacations, and the bills never stopped. Harry's secret ambition was to burn everyone's bills, announce she'd done it, and see what happened. The night of April 15th, when the lines curled around the railroad tracks as people hastened to dump their IRS forms in the mail, her ambition flamed beyond disposing of bills. She wanted to tear down every IRS building in America. She figured every other postal worker felt the same. Excuse me. Low clouds and a light drizzle didn't dampen her mood. The warmth of spring brought out the best in Harry. A squawk from the computer elicted, "I know I did it right. Why is it talking to me?" from Miranda. "Zero out and try again." "I don't like it." Miranda, chin up, strode away from the offending machine. A knock on the back door awakened T. Tucker. Before she could bark, Susan Tucker, her breeder, jumped inside. She held her umbrella out the door, shook it vigorously, then closed the door, propping the umbrella to the right of it. "Gloomy day, girls." "Gloomy day, irises." Mrs. Hoggendobler, a passionate gardener, replied. "Miranda, did you make orange buns again?" Susan sniffed the begilding scent. "Indeed I did. Help yourself." Susan gobbled one before Miranda finished her sentence. "Pig." Harry laughed at her best friend. "It's true," Susan sighed as she licked her lips. "I might as well live up to my billing." She ate another one. "She'll ask for a rowing machine next Christmas," Mrs. Murphy remarked. "Won't use it. No one ever uses those things," Tucker said. "Boom Boom uses hers." Pewter opened one eye. She'd been snoozing out on the chair at the small table in the rear. "She would." Mrs. Murphy stuck her paw in an open mailbox. "Don't you love the way the clear window on bills crinkle when you touch them?" "Bite it," Pewter egged her on. "Ah, better not. Mom's still mad at you for your shameless display at the meeting last night." Tucker, ever obedient, chided her. "Hee hee." Mrs. Murphy's whiskers twitched forward. Susan walked over to scratch her ear. "You were the best part of the Water Commission meeting." "Say, wasn't Archie a pip?" Mrs. Hoggendobler, beyond 60, although she'd never admit her exact age, used slang from her generation's youth. "Pip? He was a flaming asshole," Harry laughed. "Don't be vulgar, Harry. That's the trouble with you young people. Cursing betrays a paucity of imagination." "You're right," Harry smiled. "How about my saying that Archie was fraught with froth?" "A frith or froth, or a froth of frith." Susan kissed Murphy's head. "I like that," Murphy purred. What's a firth?" Mrs. Hoggendobler asked. "I don't know, it sounded right." Susan laughed at herself. "To the dictionary, girls." Miranda pointed to the old Webster, its blue cloth case rubbed shiny, the cardboard sticking out of the corners. "Is there really such a word?" Harry wondered. Miranda silently pointed to the Webster again. Susan sat down at the table, thumbing through. The orange bun screamed under her nose. She snatched another. "Firth," old Scandinavian word meaning an arm of the sea. "English language is a lifelong study," Miranda pronounced. The Reverend Herbert Jones strode up to the counter. The ladies on the other side. "I smell orange." "Come on in." Harry lifted the divider. He helped himself to an orange bun. Pewter ate one when no one was looking. It made the cat so full she couldn't move. The humans were surprised that Pewter wasn't begging until Miranda counted the orange buns. "Susan, did you eat 4?" "3. Uh-huh. Miranda sternly reproached the cat with a look. It had no effect whatsoever. "This water business worries me." Herb licked his fingers, then found a napkin. "I don't know why Archie is behaving the way he is. He's known about the old study for years." His voice shot upward. "The various conservation groups in the county are on top of this one anyway. They're more pressing political issues." "Like what?" "Like a new grade school in Greenwood." "The English language is a lifelong study," Miranda pronounced. The Reverend Herbert Jones strode up to the big counter, the ladies on the other side. "I smell orange." "Come on in." Harry lifted the divider. He helped himself to an orange bun. Pewter ate one when no one was looking. It made the cat so full she couldn't move. The humans were surprised that Pewter wasn't begging until Miranda counted the buns. "Susan, did you eat 4?" "3. Uh-huh." Miranda sternly reapproached the cat with a look. It had no effect whatsoever. This whole water business worries me. Herb licked his fingers, then found a napkin. I don't know why Archie's behaving the way he is. He's known about the old study for years. His voice shot upward. The various conservation groups in the county are on top of this one anyways. There are more pressing political issues. Like what? Like a new grade school in Greenwood. Yeah, that is pretty important, Harry agreed. That fops Sir H. Vane Tempest, and if he's a knight or lord or whatever, I'm John the Baptist. Herb arched an eyebrow. Called me up and chewed me out for having too much brass on my foraging cap. What? The three women stared at him. Like a fool, I agreed to be in his reenactment. Now look, girls. He always called them girls, and there was no point in mentioning that might not be desirable. I'm no fanatic. I need to fill out the ranks. He wants me to be 100% accurate, though. He says no real soldier would have all that brass on his cap because it's just one more thing to keep clean. Exactly what is your cap? Miranda asked. VA first. And then he said I had to wear something called a havelock. It's a piece of white canvas that buttons over the cap. He said it might be hot and a real soldier would want to keep the sun off. I told him I'd spent enough money, and if I wasn't 100% accurate, that was too bad. He huffed and puffed. Finally, I told him he wasn't an American, and far more important, he wasn't a Virginian, and he shouldn't tell one born and bred how to dress. My great-granddaddy was in the war. His was living high on the hog in England. He sputtered some more and said nationality had nothing to do with it. This was living history. He shook his head. Obviously, the man has nothing better to do with his life. What about Ned? Harry turned to Susan. Is he getting obsessive? He started out like the Rev. She smiled at her when she said that. Now he's really into it. Why do you think I'm getting involved? That settles it. I'm going. Mrs. Murphy spoke from the depths of the mail cart. Fat chance, Tucker replied. I am too going, and I'll tell you why, midget fatso. I'm not fat. You're so low to the ground, how can I tell? The tiger cackled. I'm going because there were Confederate cats. They were vital to the war effort. We kept mice out of the grain supplies. What about Union cats? Pewter, a glorious Confederate gray, said. We don't mention them. What are you all talking about? Susan, sensitive to animals, asked them. The reenactment, came the reply. You know Blair Bainbridge bought everything authentic. Not reproductions, but real stuff. Must have cost him a fortune. Herb mused. I'd kill for this Porsche. Harry's eyes clouded over. You'd have to, Susan poked at her. You can't even afford a new truck. Ain't it awful? Harry hung her head in mock despair. Your ex is going as a cavalry officer. No one can find a jacket large enough for him, so he's wearing a period muslin shirt and gray pants. I hope he's considered the small fact that most of our heroes aren't accustomed to continuous gunfire and cannon fire. He mentioned that. Herb folded his arms across his chest so he wouldn't reach out and grab another orange bun. He was on yet another diet, and he'd cheated already. I have mixed emotions about Civil War reenactments. I think we're glorifying violence, Harry said. I can't help it. I think there's a nasty reenactionary undertow to all this. Never thought about it, Susan wrinkled her brow. I figured it was what they said, living history. Besides, Ned gets dragged to so many things with me, I have to go along with this. Well, if it's living history, then why aren't we reliving inventing the Reaper or the cotton gin? Why are we instead reliving the most horrible thing that's ever happened to this country? 60% of the war between the states was fought on Virginia soil. You think we, of all people, would have the sense not to glorify it? Maybe it's not over. Herb stared at the ceiling. He hit the nail on the head. Mrs. Murphy played with her. All right, we're on chapter 6 now. Later that afternoon, the clouds grew darker still. Deputy Cooper walked through the back door. Hey, "Hey," Harry answered. "Where's Miranda?" "Ran home for a minute." Harry pointed to a chair. "Sit down." "Have you seen Tommy Van Allen?" "No." The two cats, dozing in the canvas mail cart, woke up, sticking their heads over the top. "He's been missing for 2 days. 2 days that we know of, and his plane is missing too." Mrs. Murphy put her paws on the edge of the cart with apt attention. "Cynthia, how could his plane be missing for 2 days and the airport not realize it?" They thought the plane was in Hangar C, the last hangar for repairs. Apparently, Tommy had scheduled a maintenance check for Monday morning. How could the plane take off and not return without anyone noticing? See, I wondered about that myself. The airport closes at midnight. He could have gone off then, and he is in the habit of staying a night or two at his destination. Still, it's odd. "I know where the plane is," Mrs. Murphy shouted. "Quiet," Harry shook her finger. The cat jumped out of the cart and bounded into Cynthia's lap. "I don't know where Tommy is, but I know where the plane is." "She's affectionate." Cynthia scratched her ears. "Don't waste your breath," Peter advised Mrs. Murphy. "Do you really know where the plane is?" Tucker asked. "Tally Urquhart's old barn. I'll even take you there." Rain rattled on the window pane. Peter settled back down the mail cart. Wait for a sunny day. Mrs. Murphy jumped off Cynthia's lap and back into the mail cart, where she rolled over Peter. "You don't believe me." "I don't care." "Sunday night, then. When I came to bed wet, that's when I saw the plane." She swatted the inattentive Peter. "Temper tantrum." Harry rose and separated them. "Has anyone picked up Tommy's mail?" Cooper asked. His secretary. Harry held Mrs. Murphy on her shoulder. Miranda came through the back door. Cynthia asked her about Tommy. "He'll show up. It's hard to hide a 6'5" man," Miranda advised. "He's done this before." "He stopped drinking," Harry reminded her. Maybe he slipped off the wagon," Miranda frowned. "I know where the plane is," the cat bellowed. "God, Murphy, you'll split my eardrum." Harry placed her on the floor. Okay, we are on chapter 7. The longer days helped Harry finish her chores when returning home from work. She pulled Johnny Pop, her 1958 John Deere tractor, as good as the day it was built, into her shed. When she cut the choke of the exhaust, it always popped, one loud crack, which made her laugh. She cleaned stalls, throwing the muck into the manure spreader. Since it was raining, she'd have to wait until the ground dried before spreading anything onto it. Harry always put her equipment back in the shed. Her dad had told her that that was the only way to do it. Stuff would last for decades if well built and well cared for. She missed her father and mother. They were lively, hard-working people. As she grew up, she realized that good people are hard to come by, and what good people really are. They'd had a German Shepherd, King, when she was in her teens. King lived to an advanced age, and when her mother died, King followed. Harry told herself that one day she'd get another German Shepherd, but she hadn't got around to it. Maybe because a shepherd would remind her of her mother and make the loss even more apparent. Tucker had been given to her as a 6-week-old puppy by Susan, one of the best corgi breeders in Virginia. Harry didn't like small dogs, but she learned to love the bouncing, tough corgi. Then she decided if she brought a shepherd puppy home, it would upset Tucker, another reason to procrastinate. Actually, the shepherd would be upset at the cats more. Tucker, outnumbered, might have been happy for another canine on the place. She dashed to the barn, rain sliding down the collar of her ancient barbour. "I've got to re-wax this thing. Water has been seeping through the back of the coat." The phone rang in the tack room. "Hello?" "Harry, Ridley Kent here. I've agreed to help Archie canvass landowners. I'm looking at a topo map and a flat map. You've got a creek in your western boundary." "Yep. Strong Creek?" in spring, but even in the summer, it never dries out completely. The water comes down from the little yellow mountain. What about springs? There's one out at the eastern corner. North or south? Northeastern. Have you ever had your well run dry in a drought? No, neither did Mom and Dad, and they moved to this farm in the 40s. Thanks. Sure. She hung up the phone. Mother, there's an underground spring in the depression in the cornfield, Tucker told her. I can hear it. Harry rubbed the dog's soft fur. I don't have any treats he's on me. Sorry. The horses, munching hay in their stalls, lifted their heads when Mrs. Murphy jumped on the stall divider from the hayloft. Pewter, on the track trunk, her favorite spot, watched her nimble friend. She could jump like that if she wanted to, but she never did. It jarred her bones. Simon's found a quarter, Murphy announced. Don't tell, a tiny voice complained. I don't want your quarter, Tucker called out as the possum's beady little eyes peered over the hayloft ledge. Harry looked up at him. Evening, Simon. He blinked, then scurried back to his nest. Simon wouldn't show himself at first, but over time he'd learned to trust Harry. That didn't mean he was going to talk to her. You had to be careful about humans. The rain pounded down. Harry checked the barometer in the track room. The needle swung over to Stormy. She walked up and down the aisle. She'd filled each water bucket, put out hay, put new salt cubes in the bottoms of their feed buckets. Everything. But Harry liked to double check. She unplugged the coffee maker in the track room, folding up the cord and slipping it in the drawer of the tall, narrow chest. She kept bits in those drawers, as well as hoof picks, small flat things, and other small items. She'd learned her lesson when the mice ruined her first coffee pot by chewing through the cord. They had electrocuted themselves, but they could have started a fire in the barn. Since then, she ran light cords through the narrow PVC tube that she attached to the wall. This was the only exposed cord. Harry also kept fire extinguishers at both ends of the barn, plus one in the hayloft. Right now, she was in less danger of fire than being blown off the surface of the earth. She paused at the open doorway. You know, I'd better close the barn doors. She walked to the other end and pulled the doors closed. Then she returned to the end of the barn facing the house. Kids, you with me? Three little heads looked up at her. Yep. She pulled the barn doors at the end closed, with a sliver of room for her to squeeze out. Then she ran like mad for the screened porch door. The two cats and dogs jetted ahead of her. I hate to get wet, Peter yowled. Slowpoke. Mrs. Murphy pulled open the door. You guys aren't smart, Harry admitted her brood. The animals shook on the second porch. Harry removed her coat and shook it too. I swear, when it dries, I will re-wax it. She lifted a thick pile toweled off a peg, kneeling down to dry off the animals. Apart from the rain drumming on the tin roof, it was quiet. She made herself a fried egg and pickle sandwich, fed the animals, then sat down to read The Life of Shazam, but couldn't keep her eyes open. Low pressure systems made her sleepy. Mrs. Murphy listened to the rain. As soon as it dries, we're going over to the old barn. All right, so that was the end of chapter 7. We will pick up on chapter 8 next time of Rita Mae Brown and Sneaky Pie Brown, Cat on the Scent.